Hey, welcome guys to this edition, volume 12 of Cyber Cafe. And we're here with Adam again from Liberty Rising. And we're going to discuss basically the Western decline of democracy and the things that we're looking at currently in this state of affairs with all the shenanigans and the crises that continue to ensue. Day after day. So that being said, let's go ahead and I'm going to give it to Adam, and then we'll go ahead and go into it, I guess.
Sure. How would you like me to start? The West is falling, and billions must suffer. No. We can all see that things aren't going well. And a big question is why. And my thesis is that the West is not declining as a result of organic market pressure and conditions and natural evolution, but it's more a direct consequence of the ruling elite. It's the politics, it's the government. It's the government and their agents, it's the corporations, it's the banks, it's the media, it's the government. My perspective is that society, Western civilization in particular, is being systematically plundered by this ruling class, by the elite, and that the people en masse have been conditioned into accepting this via brainwashing, but via systematic psychological operation, mass manipulation, the media. A word that I really like is called menticide, which is just national or mass scale brainwashing. And ultimately that's captured in a single word: democracy. I think that it's this most dangerous belief in political authority and democracy that has enabled this ruling class to systematically plunder our civilization and ruin things to enrich themselves. And that's my thesis as to why we're finding ourselves in a deteriorating situation.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is I think we have to look back at like the last depression, in the United States that came shortly after World War I, and then segued us into World War II. And there was a lot of interesting things going on then that I think are going on now. That there's some parallels. A lot of economists that studied the Great Depression, they had talked about, a lot of fraud, a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? We had the Roaring '20s, right? And there was a lot of debauchery and a lot of alcoholism and different types of moral decay, so to speak. And we've seen a lot of these similarities to today, I think, in the 2020s. And that's why I was saying that we're probably going to see a repeat, like a Depression 2.0 coming soon to a town near you, so to speak. At least in the United States, we're already starting to see. I guess Germany's in recession now officially.
Germany's in recession. The UK is in recession. Probably the Eurozone is in recession. Interestingly, Russia has been growing an enormous amount beyond. The IMF put out a forecast, so they're going to grow like a percentage, and then they revised it up to maybe 3% or something, like a crazy revision. But yeah, Germany's being deindustrialized. The sanctions are having a massive detrimental effect on the Eurozone. America also, oil prices continue going up, crushing the civilian economy, and it's all being compounded by the mass scale theft, which is fiat proliferation, or this modern monetary theory and inflation and quantitative easing, etc. Just unlimited money printing.
Yeah, I mean it's very similar what was going on during the Depression. It seems like, as we saw after World War I, what Germany was in the economic turmoil. That was during the time with Weimar Republic, when they went through hyperinflation and the failed democracy that they tried to develop. That led to the rise of Hitler, basically, right?
Sure. I mean, with the Weimar Republic, it was struggling along, and then America, things get bad, and when America catches a cold, or maybe when America coughs, the world catches a cold. What we also had in those times is really bad weather. We had very severe droughts and famines, and these really kind of were that trigger that pushed the situation over the edge. And you're completely correct that this time was pioneering for the theory of money. You had John Maynard Keynes talking about how the government has the ability and the obligation to print money and hire people, even to do useless things, in order to stimulate the economy, thereby creating the illusion of prosperity and some stability, even though it results in more problems. So, to be a bit more simple about it, there's this theory that still a lot of people believe to this day, which is that in a recession, the government should be spending to keep people employed and keep society going, and by overstimulating through government intervention, you're able to improve the situation. What my school of economic thought says is this is incorrect, and there's lots of analysis that suggests that this state intervention is what exacerbated the Great Depression, made it a lot worse and a lot longer than if they would have laissez-faire, left things alone to the market. It was especially bad in Germany and in Europe with hyperinflation, and we're seeing that today on a entirely different industrial scale with modern monetary theory, which is way worse than just the introduction of paper money or going off the gold standard. It's now just an entirely counterfeit system designed to systematically plunder all your wealth, which is inflation, and modern inflation specifically.
Right. Yeah, I mean, like you saw this in the US when they did the QE. They started injecting money, or the Federal Reserve rather started injecting money into the economy to try to keep it up. And obviously inflation went up as a result of it. It did artificially stabilize the economy. However, the problem is that we're seeing the state of affairs that we are right now in the West and the United States, with the housing market out of control. I mean, it's what, 400,000 or 500,000 to buy a home. The average salary is like I think it's $60,000 or $70,000 a year, and that's just the average, and that's accumulating the top 1% earners, top 15%. That's accumulating everybody based off of the GDP. So I mean, did it help or did it hurt it? I mean, that's the thing that you have to break down and understand.
So the average salary in the US nationwide is $60,000. You said that the Federal Reserve injects money into the economy, and then you followed up with saying that it's disproportionately benefited the 1%. Do you know the mechanism for quantitative easing? And when and the question is, when you say they inject money into the economy, I'm going to contend that's not exactly true. Can you explain the mechanism of quantitative easing just on a primitive, principle level?
Yeah, I mean, as far as I'm not an economist, I'm a policy expert. But as far as the QE as far as the purpose of the QE, from what I understand in policy, is it was supposed to they were buying back bonds, I believe, economic bonds, corporate bonds, and they were trying to keep corporations afloat through the '08 recession to prevent basically bankruptcies and total collapse of the economy, of the market economy. And more or less, like none of the, no small business owners or like lower levels of the economy, economic market saw any benefit from that, so to speak. It wasn't like they were issuing stimulus like they did during during the COVID relief. So that everybody got some type of benefit from that versus with the QE, it didn't seem like it was only going towards basically corporations and top percent. That's what I understand.
Correct. I mean, stimulus, like the poor especially, helped a bit. As an economic policy, it's not very good because you're stealing from everyone to give the poor some crumbs back. But you're right that quantitative easing, it's not just printing money and giving it to people. It's printing money to buy financial instruments so that there's liquidity in the system, so that the corporations and the banks are able to stay afloat. By inflating, so what inflation is inflation is not actually a rise in prices. Inflation is an increase in the supply of money. And because the supply of money has increased, money is now worth less, and prices as a result go up. Quantitative easing, money printing, the Federal Reserve has printed this money to buy financial assets and instruments, which increases the demand, makes those financial assets and instruments more valuable, which is fantastic if you're rich, or if you're corporations, or if you're pension funds, if you're hedge funds owning these assets. And as a result, the money in the rest of the economy is worth less, meaning you're being stolen from and being made poorer as a result. And because it goes through the financial system first, and then it filters down through mechanisms of economy, it gets to the people after a year and a half-ish, and everyone's poorer as a result. The one of the minor benefits, you can say, is that by providing this artificial stability, by proliferating the money system with counterfeit paper money, you're able to keep interest rates down. And lots of people have mortgages, lots of people have debt. Government has a lot of debt, and so by keeping the interest rates down artificially, then that does provide some short-term benefit. But it also produces asset bubbles and widens wealth inequality, which is systematically plundering the people and the tax base and the ordinary person for the benefit of this ruling class, who don't own $1 million in the bank account. They own $1 million worth of stocks and housing and corporations.
Yeah, just keep. Well, what I mean is keeping the casino going, as Joe Slinte says it, like the gamblers in Wall Street. So, yeah, I mean exactly. The QE was basically to keep the rich gambling and to keep the retail investor gambling and the pensioner funds and all of that, and to prevent the stock market from crashing, so to speak. Like you pointed out. I mean, it's a scam at the end of the day, like you said. It's like counterfeit money. It's fiat. It's only worth the paper that it's written on, so to speak.
That's
it
exactly
reminds
what
me.
it is.
It reminds me. There was a movie. I believe it was called At a Time. It was Justin Timberlake, I believe. Let me look it up exactly. And you know what I'm talking about? Okay, good. Yeah. So like in the movie, I don't want to know. Yeah, that's right. In Time. Without spoiler alert, basically he had acquired wealth because they put it through like a watch, so to speak. That was connected to the person, and everybody had like a certain period of time they can live.
It was built into the skin, but
right.
But it was it's like your money is time, and so if you're poor, you live day to day, and if you're rich, you've got 100 years, 50 years, decade, and so it's like money is really real because it's directly time. And you go to the store, you buy a drink, it's going to cost you an hour or 10 minutes.
Right. So you basically work to live instead of live to work, so to speak. So like the elites are living they're living to work, or like, you know what I mean? Like you're basically your time that you're putting into your work is literally
it
wasting away.
rather than
Yeah.
paper in your wallet representing goods that you can buy. It's very literal that this will cost you 10 seconds of your life, 15 seconds. If you work, you get more time, more credit, and it's literal, direct, just in your face. A very interesting
Metaphor.
movie.
Metaphor. I mean, the thing is like, I remember they had started revolting, right, against the elites. So they were fleeing these bandits, and then the government was after him, and he had taken the daughter of some wealthy elite, and the father was going after him, and they went to crime, and they started stealing money from like vaults of banks and stuff, and they started giving it away. And then what happened shortly thereafter? Do you remember?
I don't remember what happened. I remember them breaking into banks and saying, everyone go fill up your times, take the money out of the banks, and you can live longer and all that. What happened after that?
Hyperinflation. So the elites changed the game, and I don't know if it was necessarily that the wealthy were changing it, but basically all the wealth has started accumulating to these smaller to these like poor areas of time zones. So they put them in time zones, so to speak. And basically the people, life or time became more expensive. It caused hyperinflation as a result, because they were injecting artificial amounts of time and money, or monetary time, into these poor areas, and it was causing hyperinflation of the currency. And it actually was hurting the people more than it was helping them in the end. And that was there was a foreshadow into that, and then it actually happened. But that reminds me of like what we're talking about, the fact that we have stimulus, or where there's QE. Well, QE is going to help basically the wealthy or the corporations, but still is going to hurt them, because what happens when there's the hyperinflation causes prices to rise, as you said, as you basically put it with what hyperinflation really is, or inflation is. The corporations are still going to lose, because it's going to cost them more money to borrow money from banks. It's people aren't going to buy as much because the economy is slowing down, and eventually. And on the other side, when you give stimulus, like you're saying, to the poor populations, it may temporarily cause a influx of economic output, or boost the economy to a more stable type system, or at least a stable economy for short term. But in the long term, it's eventually going to cause hyperinflation, or it's going to cause inflation. And I think I had said 2 years ago that with all the stimulus, that it was going to eventually result in this inflation that was going to be unsustainable, but it would take several years for it to occur. You've also mentioned that earlier in the podcast. And that's where we're at now. So like we see, like people have published, like meat, for instance, has literally doubled since COVID, since the lockdowns. And that could be seen, and I can see that myself when I go to the grocery store, because I have photographic memory and I'm good with numbers. So like I know exactly what I paid for beef, for steak pre-COVID, and I know what I pay for steak now. And I know the steak has doubled in price. That's stupid. I spend the same, I eat the same amount of food week to week, so I know exactly what I'm spending on things.
The price has doubled or whatever, it's gone up, and you haven't earned, your real earnings have not increased in line with the increase in prices and the price level across the economy. So you're getting screwed. At the same time, maybe your house is worth more, but you that's an asset that you can't touch. It's illiquid.
Well, it's a real asset that you're using currently, that you need. So it's a necessary asset that you can't sell in order to pay for goods and services. So it's not like, I mean, there's only one thing that you can do with that asset. Sorry to cut you off, but you could borrow against it if you don't already have a loan. And these are called like hemlock loans, and they're becoming very
nothing and be happy.
Then you can own nothing to be happy. Yeah. So these hemlocks are basically their equity against or their money. You're borrowing money against the equity in the home, and a lot of people do it in order to do home improvements. to buy, pay insurance or whatever, life expense, medical expense. Even right now, where people are living paycheck to paycheck, they're using credit cards. They're putting their groceries and things on credit cards. So they're borrowing to the future, to oblivion, to infinity and beyond, as the meme that I keep putting on the Telegram channel. So I mean, that's what's going on, and this is what happened in depression, pre-depression, and this is what happened in 07, 08. So it's the same game and it's the same circus. It just changed. The characters change from time to time, but it's the same shit nonetheless. What I see it as.
Government is by nature inefficient, and when they intervene, when they act, when the government does anything, they distort the economy. They take us away from moving towards what is good. So we're moving towards what is good, and it's kind of like a spiral going in. And anytime the government acts, our spiral going to betterness diverges rather than converges onto equilibrium. It diverges and it gets worse. And the more intervention, the worse it gets. So government by nature make things distort the market, making things more inefficient and making, therefore, you worse off. Again, they create an illusion to a lot of people, which is things may get better. Trust me, trust the government. But by nature, they make things worse. And they do this to hurt you because they are enriching themselves. And this is a tale as old as time. And this is something that's so primitive. I remember back when I was in school, like a high school, learning economics. This is what I was studying, off syllabus. But this is the basics of economics, the level above the primitive mechanics. This just is an objective fact. What's most interesting is that not only that the government is effectively seized by Marxists that are working with the international bankers to plunder and enslave you, but they're not just doing it to the economy. They're also doing it to society, to the community. For example, Joe Biden has invited millions and millions of the third world, or not even the third world, just millions of non-Americans into the United States through the southern borders wide open, fundamentally changing the demographics, which are destiny, and especially with the request or the implication that these people should, can, must be able to vote. And they should, and they vote more than otherwise Democrats, because the Democrats are the ones seeking to legitimize them and seeking to give them more benefit, more welfare. So it's not just the economy; it's the society. Really, what I think economics and finance, it's really just an autistic abstraction, just putting things into money and numbers, but it's reflecting the reality. And the reality is that the state hates the people, the natives, those who have the ability to resist whatsoever. To the point that they talk about. Here's a headline: the far right's love of farmers markets plays into a larger fascist talking point that idealizes pastoral life and demonizes, quote, degenerate urban living. They are looking to systematically undermine and destroy everything that's good about the West, bringing it down, proliferating it with more money or with people from outside to debase and bring everything down. And this is socialism, and this is Marxism, and this is my belief as to why we are degenerating, why in a world that has promised progress and advancements and innovation, why do things feel like they're constantly getting worse? I think it comes down to this unbelievably dangerous belief of the state and political authority.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I mean, we have to look at, like I said, from what my focus of tonight's podcast, that I think it's a generational type of situation where the boomers, for instance, they took over in the 70s and 80s and the political structure in the United States. In the 90s is when they actually started taking over most of the government positions. This is when Clinton was elected. And then we've had boomer leadership ever since. And of course, if you go back to the Clinton administration, they voted out, or I guess repealed, the Glass-Steagall Act, which led to the 2008 financial crisis, if you recall. If you remember the Glass-Steagall Act. Are you familiar with it? Okay, cool.
It's been a while, but yeah,
no,
I've heard it. Yeah.
So the Glass-Steagall Act basically is what keeps retail banking from investment banking. They kind of separate it, so to speak. So when they eliminated that, or
banks can't use clients' funds in order to invest in proprietary trading.
Yeah, that's part of it. Yeah, exactly. So basically, what this led to is you had these investment banks using retail funds, and they developed in the derivative markets with the CDOs that we all know about. Everybody knows about this now, as financial instruments. And they put these things in tranches, which is basically a structure of different debt obligations with housing. And this became very speculative market. And this market led to the collapse of the financial system in 2008, known as the housing crisis, and then the financial crisis of 2008. So basically, they got rid of this. And then when Bush took over after Clinton, he started to decrease the interest rates. He started to lower them down near to zero almost, if you remember. And this created an even bigger bubble because, you had all this during Clinton, they were kind of, the budget was kind of fixing itself. There was a vibrant economy as a result of Reagan economics, with business growth and entrepreneurship and building and infrastructure. And then there was global trade, and then globalization. The Soviet Union collapsed, so that opened up, and then there was more globalization, there was more trade. And then basically Bush made cheap money for all, and then the bubble just went boom to infinity and beyond, and that's what created this big mess in 2008. That's just a short version of it, basically.
And this cheap money, what does it mean? There's bubbles and things. It means that reality, the real value, is not the same as this counterfeit money system that we all believe, which is called nominal. So the nominal value is far higher than the real value, and then once the markets catch up with that, you have a crash, a correction. What cheap money does is it distorts those signals and says to these inefficient firms and companies, you can stay alive so that you're not suffering today. As a result, the inefficient firms drag on, and these are called zombie firms in economics, meaning that without the government intervention and cheap artificial money, they would not survive in a free market, which worsens the situation as they're inefficient, wasteful, but they're able to stay and survive and thrive sometimes because of cheap money, because of fiat proliferation, because the state keeps them open. As a result, they continue on these awful practices. So when it comes to the banks weren't allowed to fail. As a result, they didn't really learn their lesson. Sure, there's been some regulations that they can't mix client funds, but they're still engaging in massively risky practices with huge derivatives and instruments they're not necessarily familiar with. It's less of a massive problem, the proprietary trading, but there maintains. It could be systemic, but I think just systematic. And the difference there is systemic is a result, like a byproduct of a system, whereas systematic means it's by design of the system. So I think there remains systematic problems with the banking sector that mean that it's susceptible to these industrial scale size risks, meltdowns, because ultimately when you deposit $100 in the bank, they're going to use that to make $1,000 of new money, 10-to-1 ratio, lending that out, and cheap money, artificial. It's all due to this debt-based and debt-backed system.
Yep, a debt-based economy, and that's what the West has become, is a debt-based economy, due to the cheap and free money available. And like I said, you see Japan's economy, how it's literally like it's destroyed completely. I don't even know how it's able to function, at this point. And they were the first country to actually see negative interest rates, in the modern world. And it's like, what the hell are negative interest rates? You know what I mean?
It violates a principle of economics, which is that I would rather have $1 today than $1 tomorrow. And it can only be achieved because of because of artificial paper debt and government intervention. What's absolutely fascinating is when you look at the natural resources value by country. You take Brazil, for example. I don't know where this is sourced from, but I saw this on Twitter a year or so ago. I believe by that guy who's I'll figure it out. But anyway,
you're talking about Melee in Argentina?
No, he's
a different person. Okay.
The guy who posted it. He's a big political guy. I think he was behind that pirate streaming website.
Are you talking about Napster?
No,
or a different thing. It's okay. No worries. Yeah.
The natural resource value by country. China sits at about 23 trillion. Iran 27 trillion. America 45 trillion. And with the Russian annexation of the 4 territories in Ukraine, gaining 12 trillion. Russia now sits at $75 trillion in natural resource value by country. That is known. What's fascinating there is that the United States' natural resource wealth is $45 trillion, and the United States is $34 trillion in debt, not counting unfunded debt obligations. If you go to US debt clock, you'll see that actually way more than that. So what's fascinating is the United States is actually bankrupt because they own more, that they owe way more in debt than they do have in national assets, in natural resources.
Correct.
The national assets are
those commodities and natural resources, those aren't owned by the government. They're owned by private corporations, versus a lot of these other countries that have high levels of basically commodities and assets. They're state owned, like Russia and other countries. So it's a lot different. So it's like the federal government is only wealthy based off of the taxation that it brings in, and tariffs and whatever whatever stuff, systems or mechanisms they have to collect funds. They're bankrupt beyond bankrupt. So they, regardless of what you're saying, it's very interesting, and it's very interesting. It's very tragic. But the fact remains, the federal government doesn't really own it. You know what I mean? Like, those are owned by private corporations and private enterprises.
Tax base. And
that's it.
And that's why that's one of the reasons why they wish to undermine society and undermine the people living there by importing millions more, because they get a wider tax base, and the GDP goes up and their tax revenue goes up, which they can steal more from, plunder more from. But the GDP per capita, or the wealth per person, goes down. Just to correct myself, on the usdebtclock.org, the United States is bankrupt. It says the total assets per citizen, the US total national assets is 188 trillion, although I don't think that counts this 50 trillion I talked about. And the US unfunded liabilities is $215 trillion. So
yeah, because the GDP to debt ratio, which I use quite often in policy, and what I talk about, and as far as economy, because my economic, I guess, when I break down economy, I bring it from a policy standpoint. I'm not an economist. I'm a policy expert. So I talk about the policies that affect economy and so on and so forth. The debt to GDP ratio is like, it's like, what is it, 134% in the United States. That's bankrupt. Once it goes to 100, that's done. I mean, just imagine if you, us personally, like if we had debts to our liabilities to our assets of over 100%. I mean, I used to work in banking. I used to be a loan officer. I wouldn't lend to you if your debt to GDP or your debt to income ratio was over like 40%. I would tell you to go screw yourself. Like, get out of my bank, dude. I'm not going to do anything with you. You don't pay your bills. So when you're at 100% or 134%, you're not only bankrupt, but you are like, you owe money all over town, man. You're the kind of guy that's like, you know, it's like, get the hell out of my office, man. I don't know, I don't want to do anything with you. You're doing some fraudulent stuff, man. Get out of here. You know, that sort of thing. That's a deadbeat, basically.
And so yeah, this website says the total debt to GDP is 136%.
Yeah, so it's 136. Yep.
And if you go and you look, I mean, some people will say, look, just tax people more. But if you were to tax
90%, 99%.
If you would tax 99% of the top 1%, you would be able to fund the government for 4 months.
Yep. Yeah.
And then everyone's broke because it's the spending that's the problem. But the ruling elite don't care about you. They don't care about the implications. They're here to plunder, to systematically plunder the society, make the most for themselves, collapsing the world as they go forth. But they don't care because this is the nature of the ruling elite and this false perception of political authority, this false paradigm, which you know, and we're going to move on shortly to talk about this is the West is falling. What can we do about it, and what are the implications for us?
Yeah, because I mean, the thing is you didn't start seeing this massive decline until boomers took over economically in the West. And if you look at there are many books about it, about sociology of this generation. And what you're seeing is you're seeing common traits of this generation, such as like narcissism, greed, envy, jealousy, and just what's the other one? Was sociopathic tendencies. So I mean, you're seeing like, you know, the average boomer is like 3 or 4 different divorces in their lifetime. How many times they filed bankruptcy. I mean, it's like they keep running out of money, and then it's like, oh, don't worry, here's more money. You know what I mean? It's like they've gutted the system so much there's nothing left. And that's why you're seeing like the X-Gen and the Zoomer generations with nothing to start with, you know, and they can't afford a home and all this stuff. That's the surface issue, you know, but the reality is that as we're starting to see millennials entering the Congress, and you're starting to see a huge shakeup, right? Because it used to be status quo up until like this the turn of the I guess the new 21st century, the 2010s, 2000 last election cycle, if you look at it that way. And there was new leadership coming in that was millennials, or from the millennial generation, and the millennials that are in Congress now that have entered, they've really stirred up a lot of stuff. And the old boomer, like congressmen, they're like, dude, you need to like sit down. You shouldn't be speaking right now. You haven't earned your place, so to speak, right? And we saw this with the the Speaker of the House when he was outed. That was the result of millennials wanting him out, if you remember. Yeah, basically, I have to look up the names. I'm so sorry.
No worries.
Who was the? Yeah. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So the Congress, these millennial Republicans that went into office, they got out this. They basically single-handedly got the Speaker of the House impeached from office, and then there's to new leadership, and they were also like stirring up with bills and stuff. Like currently the bills right now with the funding of Ukraine, a lot of that's the millennials that are like, dude, we don't want to fund these bills anymore. You know what I mean? We need to start cleaning the house. We need to like stop spending so much money. And you see it like with the millennials that are out, in the retail space. A lot of millennials live very, very frugally. They watch their pennies. They're very minimalist in their lifestyle, and they're forced to be that way because they don't make a lot of money. They don't have a lot of opportunities like the boomers did growing up. And that's what I mean. You can see the difference. And like I said, this is more of a contributing factor that I'm seeing more so than, what you're saying is right, with the elites and the government. But this is actually a continual. It's an increase of that, because not only is it at the government level, but it's at the retail level as well. It's at the consumer level. So the consumers are part of the problem in a sense. They keep supporting this leadership.
Correct. It comes down to the fact that they can do this, and they do. That we empower the collapse to occur through our tax dollars, which is unfortunate, and it's very difficult to break the cycle. But it's not impossible either. I have two, so I got three things to say. The first is it was Kim.com I was speaking about, where I think I got those statistics from. I'm going to read a quote and from an American from an American scholar, we'll say, and I'm not going to give you the date of the quote just yet. I'm just going to see how well it applies. Since the state thrives on what it expropriates, what it takes, the general decline in production that it induces by its avarice, by its greed, foretells its own doom. Its source of income dries up. Thus, in pulling society down, it pulls itself down. Its ultimate collapse is occasioned by a disastrous war, but preceding that event is a history of increasing and discouraging levies or taxes on the marketplace, causing a decline in the aspirations, hopes, and self-esteem of its victims. It's by an individual called Frank Chodorov, who's an American, and if you can have a guess at kind of what year that quote was written, was said.
2008.
No, it was about 100 years ago.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
There's another one. This is by an anonymous person on Reddit, 4chan, I think 4chan. There will be no collapse the way some of these people think it. It's not going to be a dawn of the dead or whatever, where one day suddenly just shit hits the fan and prices skyrocket and everyone begins to riot and the SS come marching down the street to kill everyone. There will be no happening. It's far more insidious than that. Read the poem The Hollow Men by T.S. Eliot and you'll understand. You'll just notice that every day simple things will get a little more expensive. Everyone's homes and apartments will start to get smaller. Your work hours will get longer, but your pay will decrease. You'll see family and friends less, and in that time, you care less about them. Every day, you'll find yourself lowering your standards for everything: work, food, relationship, jobs, etc. Job security will no longer exist as a concept. You'll notice houses and apartments shrinking. People will start hanging on to clothing longer and longer. Less people will get married. Even less will have children. People will engross themselves in technological distractions and fantasy while never experiencing the true world. This is the collapse, the reduction of the American man into a feudal serf, incapable of feeling love or hate, incapable of seeing the pitiful nature of his situation for what it is, or recognizing his own self-worth.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that's where I see us being. However, I'm not black-pilled about it, so to speak. I think that there is things we can do. I think that it's not decline all the way to the bottom. I think the political situation is terrible, but you can take action and improve your situation.
Yeah, I honestly think it's a race to the bottom for a lot of these Western economies, personally. Like the thing is I see a collapse of the West. Like I see a complete total collapse, and I mean we've already like exactly like you had read in that quote. That's what's been going on for the last 30, 40 years in the West. Exactly to the T what was said. And we're past that point now. Now we're at the point of like, a Soviet style collapse where
Correct.
that's where I think we're at.
One of my favorite definitions is that socialism is when the government does things.
Mm-hmm.
That's all. If you look at federal spending, I'm pulling up a graph right now. You look at the government intervention, spending distortion in the economy the past few decades. Socialism has been the government intervention has been increasing. We saw the totalitarian nature of the government during COVID just in your face. And them laughing about it. And when I think of an economic system that is a race to the bottom, I think of socialism and government. And we talked earlier that it's not a government revenue problem; it's a government spending problem. We've discussed that they have no incentive to cut down on that spending. That they are taking active measures to increase that spending by inviting non-citizens in, giving them welfare without that being well justified or consented by the people. And they are systematically plundering society through taxes, through their actions, through endless wars in the Middle East, the military industrial complex, and just endless corruption. And it's all of this combined is declining the West in particular, and more so than there's corruption in other countries, but I think the elites have grown so powerful now in the West that it's very, very similar to the collapse of the Soviet Union, both before the collapse and then after as well, when it was proliferated by the organized criminals, by the mafia, rather than those who are well connected with the state. It was just, okay, we're the mafia now, we're going to own the means of productions, and we're your new ruling class. And that was how things were.
Well, we saw that during the 70s, where the mafia, and the 30s during the Depression. During the Depression and during the 70s, during the oil crisis and the financial crisis during the Nixon administration, we saw a rise in organized crime. And I do see this happening now. And we're seeing some rise in organized crime with with the MS-13 and some other types of crime syndicates. It's not as well known yet because a lot of the laws, like if you look at the 1930s, there was prohibition, so there was means for mafia, and then during the 70s there was crackdown on the use of drugs and things of that nature, so that opened up the drug markets and things of that nature with the mafia. So now everything's been legalized. It's gotten to the point where the government is so far out of money that now they've legalized marijuana, they're legalizing gambling, they legalized prostitution in some states and some counties in the West, and this is their last ditch effort to try to raise revenue. So that's why I don't see there a big mafia movement. But when it does collapse, you will see mafia syndicates, and you will see the like what happened to the Soviet Union after the collapse of the rise of the Russian mafia. But like I like the quote that Aaron Clarey, quoting Aaron Clarey, he used this metaphor for the West, and he said that the West was the cutest fat chick at a fat chick party as far as corruption is concerned. So as far as the corruption in the world, every single government is corrupt. It's just that we're, the United States and the West is the cutest fat chick of those fat chicks at a fat chick party, basically. I think you're muted, brother. Sorry.
Again, it's because it's in the nature of government to be corrupt.
Yeah, of course.
You said, of course, most people have bought into this psychological operation, to this mass manipulation that we live in a democracy. Democracy means you have rights and you have contribution and you are part of that governance. And so by voting, not only do you consent to the outcome, but you're actively participating and legitimizing that system. It's a Stockholm syndrome where you're pleasing the masters, and you're worshipping them by engaging in their rituals.
I believe we have another guest, and sorry, Jim Jones is with us, but continue your thought, Adam. I'm sorry.
So again, when I talk about what can be done about it, which is where I'd like to start pivoting the conversation, is to kind of recognize that we live in this statist paradigm, but it's an illusion. There is a ruling class who govern you by infringing your rights, by stealing from you systematically, by extorting you, by victimizing you. And this is what's been causing societal, cultural, economic, political decay. And so the solution is to reject that paradigm, reject the ruling class and their purported political authority, and to embrace individual autonomy, and then navigate this government overreach. So this is trading economics. If you go onto the maximum view of that chart,
okay.
Yeah, that's government spending over the past 100 years, and you can see it's only gone one direction. And then up on the right, you can do government spending to GDP.
Government
down
spending
that list to GDP.
Which one? Government debt to GDP or government spending?
Spending to GDP, yeah. Again, put it to max, and you'll see we're spending as though we're in a war right now.
Wartime economy. Yep.
It's like, why? What are we spending on? And then you got to go look at what's the government spending on, and it's spending on things that that has no business doing. The United States was established under this system of minarchy, which is let's keep the government as small as possible while fulfilling its national requirements, obligations as small as possible. Leave the people alone, And the federal government is now the most powerful institution that's ever existed. Debatably, yeah, I'd say so.
Well, in the modern world, in the modern concept, if you go back to ancient world, you can look at like Greece and Rome. But for modern, the last 1,000 years, modern civilizations, right?
You look at Greece and Rome, and you look at the totalitarian overreach of those governments onto the citizens, and they don't have, they're not arresting you for the thoughts that you say to your friends in private on social media. Maybe you go down to the square, you say "fuck Rome, let's secede." You might get crucified, perhaps, but that same thing happens here if you say I want to secede, even if you're the Prime Minister of Catalonia or whomever. If you say I want to secede, you're going to get in trouble, because we've hypnotized the population into believing this myth of democracy, and it's all a myth. It's all an illusion. It's not real. There is a ruling class who extort and manipulate and steal from you. And that is the nature of our reality. And once you accept that, and once you say, I reject this, I think this is wrong and evil, because it is, you can then start to look at what can I do about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at this chart. I looked at military spending, but this says you see the like I was saying with Reagan economics, and then the boomers took over in 1990. That's when they started taking over in banking, as well as in in government and so on and so forth. So you see in the 1980s during the Reagan economics where the interest rates started to go up, that was starting to increase, deflate the economy, so to speak, but increase consumer spending, or not consumer spending, but you know what I mean. It is what it is. But you see the interest rate during the 90s, during the Bush era, and then through the Obama era, and then Trump, you see how like the interest rates just kept dropping and dropping and dropping, right?
Because it's been manipulated and debased, so it's been artificially lowered, and now you're seeing the effects of that as there's so much demand that it's now pushing those prices up, and we're seeing a reaction to the artificial pushing down. If you zoom out to the, I think about the 10% mark there is kind of the real rate of inflation between 5 and 10% is a real rate of interest, and anything below or above that, it's artificial through debasement, and anything above, one can argue, is usurious. But if you involve the government and distort away from the free market, laissez-faire, you end up with problems that you can maybe suppress for a while, but eventually the fabric of reality is going to snap back and hit you square in the face.
Mm-hmm. The average home prices over the max. Wow. Wow. And you can see the increase. Yeah, go ahead.
We're at this point now where, you talk about the debasement and this low interest rates, but we're at the point where we have these left-wing economists like Michael Hudson saying that we can just, it's okay, it's all good. We can just use MMT. We can just print it all and we owe it to ourselves and it's all going to be okay. It's just not going to, there's just no, there's no hope in sight, even the quote-unquote moral people, like the left wing, were supposed to save us from the evil capitalists. They're lost. There's no way they're going to save us with that kind of a theory. So how are you going to educate the people to help themselves?
Well, I think the way to educate the people is to look at this chart and say, this captures everything, right? So the political class, they have an incentive to keep house prices going up regardless. This is artificial.
Oh, I don't know. You think so? It depends. It all depends.
Absolutely, because the tax base owns houses and owns homes. So if the government implements policies to make sure that house prices go up, they own assets. Houses are a big macro asset. So you keep house prices going up, the ruling class gets wealthier, as well as the tax base, those who keep voting for everyone, and everyone feels wealthier. At the same time, the ruling class importing people.
That worked once.
Demand. What do you mean?
It worked. It worked the first time. People. Before 2008. It worked then. It felt good then, but now it doesn't feel good anymore. It's not going to. And even then, I can remember listening to politicians tell us that, housing, it's such an important part of our economy. It's good that these prices are going up and that's all this activity in housing. It's such a great part of our economy. No, it's not a great part of our economy. It's a bloody expense. It's not a capital asset that produces anything. But when you have an elite who actually believes that that housing is a productive part of the economy, what are you done? What are you going to do? You're lost. You're leaderless.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no effective leadership. Like I said, the whole point of sustainable leadership or effective leadership is that you have to have consistency, you have to have authenticity or transparency, and you have to have effective communication. And these are three things that the boomers just don't have. They don't show these type of characteristics in their daily lives. They're not very authentic. They're not very transparent people. They're not good at communicating. You can see that with the amount of divorce rate that they have. They have the highest divorce rate in history of the Western civilization. And the other thing is that, like I said, they're not consistent.
Here in Canada now, the housing has gotten so expensive that it's just gotten so expensive that the federal government has had to get involved in building units, and it's not going to scale. They've gotten themselves into a corner here where, well, at least here, they're bringing in so many people, and it's just a mess. So none of this is going to work out, it seems, in the end to me. I know what you mean. You saying that it's beneficial to them to have the assets going up, but Well, what is it like where you are? I mean, it looks like it's going to be a crash here. I mean, it's not sustainable.
Well, they again, you look at their incentives, right? And the state is this institution run by gangs of murderers, plunderers, and thieves, surrounded by willing executioners, propagandists, sycophants,
That's
crooks,
exactly
liars,
right.
clowns, charlatans, dupes, useful idiots, right? It's an institution
Well, that is the perfect. That is the
everything.
actual description of it. Correct. That's beautiful.
That's from Hans Hermann Hoppe, one of the leading anarcho-capitalists. That is
Right.
the state. And so the solution is fuck the state, become self-sufficient. Fuck this state. It's up to you. Empower yourself to be able to kind of exist beyond, outside, and in spite of what the state are doing to the system. But you have to first recognize that this is the state, that socialism and the state are both cancer and are, again, the cause of all these problems. So you need to be able to work, to counter that and outside of that and in response to that.
That's valid. Get your lifeboat together.
So when we were talking about how can you do that? How can you embrace individual autonomy? And as well, how do you navigate government overreach? So just on that second point, I'm going to say that, I used to live in the United Kingdom. I found that the tyranny of the British government and the level of socialism there was so totalitarian that it was entirely untenable for me to continue living there. So I had to leave the country. I would suggest, if you live in New York and the coastal cities along in California, really consider, is this a place that it's acceptable for you to keep living? Ordinarily, a lot of people people have said, should I leave? Should I go to Asia? Should I go to Europe? Should I go to a rural place in my country? I think it's better not to leave. I think it's better to go somewhere where you're better able to be self-sufficient, away from these big cities where there are communities and farmers markets and just less government, less people, less urbanization. I think that's a big way to do it. I do believe that leaving, there are some jurisdictions, some geographies that are just, I wouldn't go near them, and I would therefore leave. But I think that generally, I don't have this black pill that everything's going to go to shit because these the political and the financial systems are going to collapse. It doesn't change, your reality if you're well prepared. If you grow your own food, what difference if the supermarkets are empty? It does. Of course, there are impacts, but if you grow your own food, you're not going to die.
Well, I do know that during the Depression and like the wartime economy during World War II, they used to promote these freedom gardens, and they would tell people to grow personal gardens to basically alleviate, not place so much burden on the national food grid, the food supply, and it did help. It did work. I know in Russia, a lot of people, they have community gardens and they grow their own personal crops to offset the cost of food, and it's encouraged and it's allowed. But unfortunately, in the West, in the United States, you can't do that. In a lot of cities, a lot of states, there's laws against actually having community gardens. I know, and if you have an HOA, which I don't know if you guys are familiar with the HOA, I can't grow a garden in my HOA. Not allowed. I can get fined $100 a day if I grow a garden, small garden. So, and that's in Florida, especially 60% of the housing is like HOA. I believe it's between 40 and 60% of the houses are in an HOA. So a lot of them, you can't grow gardens. You can't grow, other than growing in your house, like maybe tomatoes or something on the windowsill. That's about as far as you can go. So, yeah. So much for that idea.
Where I live in Eastern Europe, and like the house, the garden, it is the farm. There's grapevines and there's trees, and they grow walnuts and potatoes, and they grow everything, and they make their own wine, make their own moonshine. It's called rakia over here. Harvest their fruits, apples. I went to my girlfriend's house in the village. And I went to the supermarket and I bought some apples, and her dad laughed at me. It's like, you picked the apples for me, they're down in the cellar, go get our apples. I'm like, yeah, that was silly of me. Like, they grow enough because that's what they do. And when I go more out into the country, I said to my girlfriend, I said, why do many of these houses have two houses? There's like a house and a wooden house at the back. She went, oh, that's where they keep their animals. Like,
right.
Oh, yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I moved overseas in 2008, right, the recession. I first went to Korea. They didn't actually see an economy. They weren't really affected by the economy or the recession in the West. So I was able to find work there. And I went back to Europe for a little bit, and they just started seeing around 2010-ish, 11, they started seeing the repercussions of the economic situation from America, the 2008 recession. Then I found my way to Georgia, and everything that you said basically is how they survive there, or they've had survived since the 91 collapse. Is they have, a lot will have villages, or they'll have farms and their houses outside the city. I believe France was like that for a while in Paris. A lot of people would have farmhouses, and they would get a lot of their crops from the farm. And they'd go on the weekends, go out to the villages and to the countryside to go get food and farmers markets, things of that nature. For it's cheaper than buying in the city. But that's kind of how Europe is. In America, we used to be like that, pre-industrial revolution or last industrial revolution. But we've lost our way of that. A lot of people don't know how to. If you ask any American nowadays, any modern Westerner about growing crops, they would have no clue. They just think that they get their food from the grocery store. So, you know what I mean? Versus in Eastern Europe and Russia, it's a way of life. Go ahead.
I was just like that. Like when I was in the UK, I didn't do anything. Go to the grocery store. I mean, I was a student. I went to university. I did my own things. But my garden, we had like some figs that were growing and some other fruit, that was small once a year. But nothing like that. But what we're seeing you talk about most of America, I think you've got a large, if you look at what happened with this crisis with Texas and the border. You had middle America, all the red states supporting Texas. I think most people in these states kind of are aware of how to grow your own food, and these are the states that are very prominent for homeschooling as well. And then
in the Midwest, yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, in the Midwest, so like Kansas, Nebraska. Texas is more of a ranching state. It's a lot of oil revenue. Even Florida, to an extent, where I live, Central Florida, it's very agriculture. So some people, we have orange groves, mostly sugar canes in the south, and there's a lot of cattle ranches. A lot of those have been bought up and sold and developed into real estate. Same thing that's going on in Texas right now. So you're not really seeing that so much, more so in the Midwest. And a lot of the Midwest is what they call flyover country. So there's not a lot of people living there, and a lot of people that live there don't necessarily work in farming. They may know someone that works in farming. They may have a friend or family member that's a farmer, but it's a dying breed. It costs so much to try to operate a farm in the West. It's just not worth it anymore. Well, and a lot of people sell the land.
Farming. There's industrial farming, and then there's farming from your garden. Even like just growing some herbs or green onions, potatoes. They're very easy to grow tomatoes, potatoes, and just you start up on that self-sufficiency. You don't need to go and immediately sell the house and move to Georgia, for example. But if you kind of get a start on growing some tomatoes, you kind of understand what it requires to do so. It's not that difficult. I've grown some tomatoes before, and it positions you better for in the event that you do need to pack up and move out from your homeowners association, because, for example, things have gotten so expensive that you're no longer having a good quality of life, and you'd be better off packing up, going somewhere else, and where you by you putting your foot in the door, you're able to be better prepared for these potentials.
I mean, like I said, what you'll start seeing and what you eventually see in the decline of an economy or decline of a country or nation state is you see crisis upon crisis upon crisis. And of course, there's crisis in every country and every civilization throughout history. This is normal. This is human. This is what we deal with on a as in a lifespan, humans on a daily basis. But when crises are man-made and when they occur in a frequency that is unsustainable is when you are on the verge of collapse. And currently in the West, we are seeing crisis upon crisis upon crisis that could be prevented, and they're not being prevented. They are ongoing, and each crisis is worse than the last one. And it's like the whole meme, the new thing, you know what I mean? And these are man-made crises. A lot of these are things that can be prevented just by not being stupid and being, more prepared and less, incompetent, if you will.
I think, but again, like that's kind of assuming that these crises are not deliberate. But my belief is that I think the government have learned from, say, MK Ultra in the 50s that trauma allows you to control people. So they purposefully orchestrate disastrous events to keep their citizens afraid and dependent upon them. And that's one of the reasons why there's constant crises, and also why mental illness has been rising. And again, why these are the reasons behind the collapse of the West.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Rome. Rome is a really good example of civilization because it's the foundation of modern civilization started from Rome, so to speak, in a lot of ways. If you look at a lot of the leadership in Rome, towards the latter part of Rome, they would create man-made crises. They would take grain, and the Caesars would hide it from the people, from the populations, to create an artificial crisis or food shortage, just so that they can release it and say, "Oh, I am your savior. Everybody, look, the Caesar saved us all. He brought grain out of his anus. Now everybody's happy, bread and circuses." So this shit did occur in the Roman period. That's occurring now. And you're right. It is man-made crises to make leadership look more competent and look more savior, godlike. But at the end, just like in Rome today, it caused the end of those empires, and they caused the end of those leadership, the Caesars, so to speak. Go ahead, sorry.
Correct. It's not just like Rome. It's like Rome. I've actually been looking throughout this podcast so far. I've been looking for this one information that directly links all this back to Rome, precisely. It's exactly these same patterns that rhyme that led to the collapse of the Roman civilization and the world order. It's exactly the same thing as today. Or tantamount.
It's just crisis and artificial crisis. And you talk about mental health issues on the rise. That a lot of that is dealing with the fact that the seed oils, and then the single parent households. There's a lot of sociological and environmental, as well as like food that we're eating and things of that nature. These are policies that have been enacted and allowed for this, and there's been no oversight, or at least the capitalist nature of big pharma, big ag, and all of these are making a lot of money pushing certain types of policies. But more importantly, you look at I just want to get to one point. I'll let you rebuttal back. But look at the mental health issues in the United States and NATO. Europe is trying to engage in an ongoing conflict. And I hate to segue in this into Russia. We'll go back to like what your comment, but it's not really a segue into Russia. But you look at the military and the state of the military, similar to the end of Rome, where the military was basically a volunteer force and it was made up of foreigners from like Gaul and all kinds. It was not very well structured towards the end of Roman Empire, as historians have mentioned. If you watch any documentaries, you're reading any historical text about it, you'll see that a lot of the Roman legions towards the end of the Roman Empire weren't well organized. But mental health is a national security issue for the U.S. military and for NATO, because these military soldiers will not be able to engage in combat effectively in combat or for long periods of time in combat. I know two people right now that they basically were washed out of the military, Section 8, if you will, or they left under general conditions, and they're getting VA benefits for PTSD from like boot camp, or they're getting checks for like mental disorders and stuff. I mean, if you look at Russia and you see like who the heck's going to give you? Is Russia going to give soldiers money just for not, for leaving the military and saying that, oh, you have some kind of mental health issue as a result of the toughness of military or the adjustment? I mean, the thing is most of these soldiers in the West are not fit for duty in that regard. They're not mentally tough enough to be able to fight in combat. That's the biggest issue that we're facing right now. But go ahead, sorry.
So I was going to say that you talked about the capitalist nature of big pharma. That's not capitalist. This is cronyist. Crony capitalism. It's the state.
Yeah, crony capitalism. Yep.
It's crony capitalism. It's not free market.
Right.
They survive. They thrive because of the state, rather than in spite. Due to
special interest, and big money donors to politicians to get their agendas across. You're right. Crony capitalism. Sorry, thank you. Exactly what I meant. Sorry. Go ahead.
You said something else that. We talked earlier about. I think when reading a quote that these ruling elite, they're building their own doom. They hate the people. They demonize the people. They feed them poison, the chemicals and the Cheerios that make you infertile. And that's something I read. Really recently, that seems quite legitimate. In America, they're so poor they don't even have real sugar. You guys have
high fructose corn syrup.
HFC, yeah,
crazy.
Yeah, I don't eat it. I don't consume it. I do not consume high fructose corn syrup. They passed a law that was forced by health enthusiasts and doctors to put food labels on all of the food in the United States. So like now they have to put what's in it, everything that's in it, high fructose corn syrup, any ingredients. I read all food labels, everything I eat. So if there's high fructose corn syrup, that's why I don't drink. I don't want to show for the label because I'm not sponsoring them, but basically like I don't drink soda with sugar, high fructose corn syrup. I drink zero cola, or I didn't just drink water, which I got my water here,
And I don't drink water because I don't trust the state water.
Yeah, same thing. Only bottled water
or mineral water from the spring. Yeah. I drink sparkling water. I appreciate that.
But yeah, I mean, basically, I cut out high fructose corn syrup. I cut out soybean oil. I don't eat it at all. I cut it completely out. It's in everything in the West because it's a cheap byproduct. Or it's a cheap oil that they use, and they put it in bread and everything. So I don't eat that. And then I avoid palm oils and other types of oils. So the only oils I will eat are anything that's cold pressed. So like, sunflower oil, cold pressed. I has to go through cold press because anything working in the oil industry, as long as I worked for a petrochemical company in Saudi Arabia. And I learned about the heating of oil. And that's how they make a lot of these seed oils, is they have to heat them up to like 1,000 degrees temperatures. And what they do is it causes it to become acidic and rancid. It starts breaking down literally as soon as it leaves the market. As soon as it leaves the manufacturing, it starts breaking down immediately. So the time that you use it to cook with or eat with it, it's already rancid and it's destroying your system. Decreases your omega-3s.
There's this article written by Gina Florio, December 15th, 2022. American Heart Association was paid off by Procter & Gamble to say heart disease was caused by saturated fat, not seed oils. We've been told for decades that heart disease is caused by saturated fat found in butter, meat, and eggs, but recent research reveals that the studies promoting these messages were heavily compromised.
Yep.
Yeah, the sugar,
and it
the
didn't
sugar
even cost
industry
them
as
that
well.
much money. That guy, they paid him off very cheap.
Yep.
Also, I saw one just today that in a Harvard diabetes studies, red meat, what they categorized as red meat, was not red meat. It was lasagna and turkey cheese sandwiches and ciabatta.
Right.
This is a reason why nutritional epidemiology, especially in America, is junk science. Is due to special lobbyists that they are being paid to make these studies, and as such, they are heavily corrupted.
Yeah. And like I said, you tell the boomer, like, I hate to bring the boomer back into it, but I mean, we have to understand that they are a pinnacle part of this decline. I mean, they help spearhead it. Literally, the decline has occurred under one generation. One generation basically spearheaded this in a much faster, rapid rate than over like history of any type of generation. And we see this in the geriatric leadership in the Soviet Union, that towards the end of the Soviet Union, it was led by people in their 70s and 80s that were geriatric at the time. There's this current study right now about geriatric leadership and decline of those civilizations. But getting to the point, boomers, if you tell any boomers about seed oils or any of the stuff, they're so brainwashed to believe all of the propaganda that came out from these studies that they're like, you are full of crap, blah, blah, blah. And they just write you off like some idiot young kid that's crazy, you know? But it's like, what about your grandparent? What about your parents, the great generation? Did they eat that shit? No, they didn't eat that shit. They ate the stuff that I eat. And you look at go look at my health bill and put it to your health bill. You know, I developed pre-diabetes, and then I went back to the old traditional, you know, stoic way of eating, and I basically reversed the type 2 diabetes. I reversed it completely. And in a short period of time, less than a year, I reversed it completely. And my blood work, yeah, thanks. And like I said, all I did was I just looked at like what I was eating. I was like, I cut all that shit out that I told you, and basically my blood work came back normal. And my doctor's like, how did you do this? And I was like, well, let me tell you. Cut out high fructose corn syrup. I cut out soybean oil. I cut out bread. I cut out this and I cut out that, and I eat whatever I want because I predominantly eat like red meat, omega-3s, fish, eggs, and butter, and olive oil and avocado, and a lot of fatty foods like olives and stuff like that. And I was like, basically a Mediterranean diet. She was like,
And allegedly beef and pig tallow is quite good. It is apparently even better than olive oil, but I have olive oil and butter.
Yeah. Yo, I usually when I cook, I try to use beef fat, or like you said, the animal fat. I use that over olive oil if I can, or I use butter over olive oil. But real butter. I'm not talking about some like fake processed butter. I'm talking about butter with omega-3s, with the fatty, the good fats in it and stuff, you know. And yeah, it is what it is. I feel healthier. It is what it is.
And again, when you look at food, you look at spending on food. In America, especially, just I cannot believe how bad your food system is, and also how bad the poor are managing this. In terms of, I got food stamps, I'm going to buy Monster energy drinks and chips, and then I'm going to complain that my food stamps aren't going far enough. I'm like, what on earth? But like they're spending less money, on the cheapest food, and as a result, their health is getting bad, and their health bills and health spending, on an economic level, a society level, is going up. Whereas if you're investing more money into the food, into farm-raised cow, beef, grass-fed, free range, if you're investing into organic food, health spending goes down. And that's
what I did. That's exactly what I did. I went from eating, I watched it, what I looked at, and I cut out all the junk. and it was actually expensive when I was looking at the junk. And like I went to mostly organic eating and more protein. Protein's expensive, like beef and stuff is the good protein's expensive, but I reduced the amount of food consumption. I started doing intermittent fasting, and I got my food bill at the same cost as what I was eating before, and I was eating a lot less, and I was getting more nutrients from it. So the main thing, and like I said, I don't want to turn this into a nutrition podcast. It's, we keep it to policy, but like I said, like what you'll notice is that most Westerners, not most, but I mean predominantly the poor, mostly the working poor, they are starving for nutrients because they're not drinking water. They're not drinking, even if you drink tap water, it's like whatever. They're not drinking water. They're not eating healthy. They're eating junk. They're eating fast food. And I've been eating fast food lately because I haven't had a lot of time, but I try to like reduce the salt content. I do everything I can. The ketchups, I use like organic ketchup. I'm like, no, give it to me plain. I do everything I can to try to minimize the amount of exposure to these seed oils and different things that I can. Even if I eat out, I try to find healthy alternatives. But the reality is that they're starving for nutrients because they're not eating healthy. They're not getting those natural foods, into their body, their whole foods. And you see this a lot with Eastern Europeans because they do eat quite healthy. They eat natural foods and organic foods all the time. They don't have this issue.
I had some friends come and visit from the UK, and they said, "What is traditional food over here?" And I said, "It's just raw organic food. Like that, They have a lot of cheese here, but just whatever's seasonal that they grow in the garden. Maybe some stuffed pepper. But other than that, it's just whatever they grow. It's just nice organic food. That's the traditional food here. Nice meats, nice cheese, nice wine, but just good." Vegetable rich, meat rich, delicious food, and that's the food over here. That's the lifestyle. As you say, Mediterranean diet's fantastic, very similar here. And you talk about like, I don't want this to be a health, I want it to be a policy. But going back to what I said, this is the policy. It's rejecting that the government's here to save us.
Modernity is what they call it, right?
It's the cultural consensus there.
There you go. Yeah,
it's not even a policy there.
They refer to it as.
Where you are, Adam, in the Balkans, that's cultural consensus of what way life should be. Do you think that in the UK, just given the climate, that things would grow the same way or in a similar bountiful fashion that they do where you are?
Well, where I am, it's close to the equator, but we're higher up, and it's kind of although I'm much more south. The way that the climate is continental, sometimes I'm as cold. I can be colder than in Poland, even though I'm much further south. The UK. I mean, again, go back 100 years. Look at what they did during World War II. Everyone grew food in their gardens.
I'm just not familiar with what that food was exactly. I'm just curious.
I mean, when I was growing up, lots of food. When I was growing up, the neighbors, me and my brothers, we would be playing soccer in the garden. We'd kick the footballs over the fence into my neighbors' award-winning garden patches just in their little plot of land. And they grew carrots that were this large. They grew cabbages, potatoes, pretty normal stuff.
Sure.
Themselves, they sold it on. And the great thing about having a home garden is, depending if you have an entire garden, it's 1,000 kilometer square with trees and all these things. It does take work, but if you just have some patches in the yard, it's more of a hobby, and it's actually very therapeutic. I remember feeling quite stressed by working online or doing the job and having to go and pick the cherries from the tree. It was enjoyable working with your hands, rewarding delicious cherries, eating them as you go, and it was like, wow, I'm happier, less stressed, more fulfilled. I'm gaining skills. This is a much better way to be. And then you can we hear that you can sell them or you can give them to your friends and your community, and they give you what So I can have an unlimited supply of walnuts, and I'm sure I can in turn get something else back.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, like I said, in Georgia, it was there's a lot of seasonal stuff, but the thing is like we're surrounded by a lot of agricultural states. So like Turkey's produces a lot of agriculture for Europe, and we get a lot of cheap produce from them. And then we get stuff imported from Brazil. We get stuff in from all over. And locally, like I said, we have seasonal stuff like you guys have there. But for the most part, it's night and day between there and the United States. They eat a lot of sodium there. That's the only thing, and it's like they eat a lot of salty cheeses and stuff like that. It's a really high sodium diet. I think it's because of how they preserve stuff, because it's a cold climate Mediterranean. It's like it's off the Black Sea, so it's like a Mediterranean diet, similar to Italy. But they have to preserve a lot of stuff because of the harsh winter, or the winters in the mountains in the east part of the country. So a lot of the cheese is salty, and some of the food gets salty. Like they salt pork everything to keep it stored during the winter so it doesn't go bad, basically.
There are some this isn't like it's not perfect. There are problems. Like maybe high salt is a problem. And maybe as technology develops, there's more refrigeration. I'm not too sure. I'm not familiar with Georgia specifically, but I know that yeah, it's lots of people have gardens here. They store it in their cellars. They eat good, healthy food. They're self-sufficient. They don't believe that the government is this all-powerful entity that's beneficial. Everyone, like in the West, every government's corrupt, but in the West, they put on a nice suit and tie. They tell you that they're here to help. The four most dangerous words in the world are "I'm from the government. I'm here to help." Maybe more than four.
Yeah.
But they put on a nice suit and tie and they stab you in the back. Whereas here in Eastern Europe, I like to call it tracksuit corruption. You can see that they're going to slap you in the face. They're going to take some of your money. They're going to spit on your shoes. Going to shake your hand. You know that's how it is, and you go about your day. But you know that there is a corrupt ruling class. It's the same thing in the West. They're dressed a bit nicer. They're more malevolent.
Yeah, it's more organized. It's more organized. It's a different type of corruption. Different type of mafia is what they used to say in Georgia. I mean, the thing is you understand these countries have lived through the Soviet period, which is identical to the United States' its current state of situation with policy and government and economics. Not so much economics, but the way things are run from a bureaucratic type of situation or bureaucracy, and they don't like that. And they like communism's a dirty word in Georgia. You can't say that word without somebody like with an eye, basically tongue-in-cheek type situation. They don't want it. They don't want the bureaucracy, and they do everything to avoid it. It's a very libertarian state in Georgia by that reason. I think it's much the same in Eastern Europe that when I visited a lot of Eastern European countries. It was very similar. It wasn't as stoic or as ingrained in Georgia. Georgians really do not like Soviets at all. Other than Stalin, they love Stalin because he's Georgian. They do keep the statues. They do talk about them. They do celebrate them. But as far as Soviet or communism, they do not want to talk about it. They want to forget about it, or they don't really forget about it, but they just don't. They're like, dude, that was a period in past. We learned from it. We're not going to make the same mistake twice. And that's kind of the mentality. What I've seen, what I've noticed.
Do you have a flat tax where you are there, Adam?
I don't pay taxes, so I don't know. But I think there's a flat tax.
They have a flat tax. And what do you think? What is the sentiment? What is the general sentiment on government corruption? Is it just been accepted? Everyone accepts that the government's corrupt, or because in the West, like Josh said with the boomers, you just can't convince them of anything. There's a level of trust here it's fatal.
It's scary.
Brainwashed. It's a psychological operation that the boomers are entirely, like, it's a constructed reality that they've bought into. Whereas
Matrix. Cradle to the grave propaganda. Cradle to the grave propaganda. I'm coining that, by the way. Cradle to the grave propaganda for the boomers. The fucking Matrix, man. They were born in the Matrix and they're going to die in the Matrix. They're going to die poor as well and homeless.
Whereas out here, because they've been closer to reality, because they're picking up potatoes out the their gardens with their bare hands, because they've been through the collapse of communism, socialism, they've been through the mafia of the 90s, because there's real problems out here. There's the reality is not synthetic. There is reality, so people know that the ruling class is corrupt. When they say the government, the mafia, they say they are one and the same because they are, and everyone knows it. I've been in this country for 3-4 years here, visiting since I think I first came in 2019. And one thing I like to do is when I get a taxi, speak and say, tell me about what you think about the country. And one question I used to ask a lot is, how do you feel the state of the country is going? And when I was younger, I was quite optimistic, but everyone would say, I feel pessimistic. I think things are getting worse. I was like, I don't see it, because I see that people are generally getting more wealthy, like some standards are improving. But now, looking back, I'm like, okay, I understand why they're saying it. It makes a lot of sense, and a lot of it is a result of government. For example, the EU has imposed sanctions on Russia. It's driven up prices here. Everyone's gotten poorer as a result. And why has my government, the government that I'm currently subjected to, why did they sanction Russia when the people actually quite like Russia? Because the government are paid by the EU, and the EU say, here's your money, do as you're told. And they say, absolutely, because it's a corrupt ruling class which disenfranchises the people, disregarding the common good in favor of their own privileges, stealing everything. And this is, this again, it's a repeating phenomena. So a quote from Bene Gesserit, Training Manual, Politics as Repeat Phenomenon. Governments, if they endure, always tend increasingly toward aristocratic forms. No government in history has ever been known to evade this pattern. As the aristocracy develops, government tends more and more to act exclusively in the interests of the ruling class, whether that class be hereditary, royalty, oligarchs of financial enterprise, or entrenched bureaucracy. That is the nature of government. And a common mistake that many people make is thinking that the people running the country are stupid. Look at Joe Biden. He's a demented geriatric. They aren't stupid. You mistakenly think that their goal is to successfully run the country in a way that would benefit the people and the nation. What's more likely, that a bunch of idiots have conquered the country and are ruling over you, or that your country has been conquered by these ruling elites, by this foreign entity that doesn't care what happens to the country and its people? And this is why I reject political authority as the most dangerous superstition that exists.
That's well put. Yeah, I mean, the thing is it's interesting. Like I said, I think the problem is that I've made this parallel before. What I noticed the difference between policy making in Georgia, Republic of Georgia, and the United States is that leadership in Georgia, a lot of the leaders are basically millennials or X-gens. There's not many boomers in the government. That was the old system. That was the Soviet system. The communists, a lot of the boomers are still communists that are still there. So they got a lot of them out of the government, or at least people didn't want to vote that in anymore. They were tired of that old way of system. And the problem with the West, or a lot of the Western countries, is that predominantly the United States, is that a lot of the leadership are boomers. A lot of them are older X-gens, boomers, younger and older boomers, and they dominate the geopolitical system and the banking system and the businesses. And you see that. I mean, you have how old is Biden and how old is Trump? You know, I mean, they're both over 70. You know, they're geriatric. These people should be retired. They shouldn't be in politics. They should allow for younger leadership to come in. that's more innovative and more able to deal with the average, worker in the society. What's the average age of the worker in the West? What are they, like 50, 60 years old or younger? You know what I mean?
Median age of the workforce is 40 in the US. 40,
So if
43 as it's going, 42 right now actually, and Trump is 77.
Right. So you have leadership that's nearly double the age of the average worker in the West. How is a person in their 70s and 80s, someone who's twice the age of the median workforce, how is that literally sustainable? How would they be able to relate to somebody that's in a working class of 40 years old? How are they able to understand what that person's going through, the current state of what they're going through? There's no relation. There are two different generations. There are two different types of work ethics, two different types of cultural differences, two different types of systems that they live under. You know what I mean? And what I mean by systems is sociological as well as cultural systems. The boomers grew up with this, they didn't have a lot of the DEI or any of the stuff that they were dealing with. They didn't have the amount of immigration that they have nowadays with the multicultural workplaces and globalization and multiculturalism throughout the world. They weren't dealing with these multi-ethnic, multicultural workplaces and trading systems, or trading, between countries, between nation states with the globalization. So they didn't have to, understand. They didn't have to have a high diversity IQ. They were basically, everybody was the same. There wasn't a lot of women in the workplace. It was mostly male dominated. How can that person relate? Somebody working today, how can like a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant who grew up in the time of plenty, who grew up in a predominantly white and male dominated workplace, relate to somebody who was an Indian, a Chinese person, or Chinese immigrant, or an Asian immigrant, Central Asian immigrant, or an African American in the workplace today? That's in their 40s and 30s. You know what I mean? How can they relate? They can't. It's bullshit. You know what I mean? Sorry to put that on a long tangent, but you know what I mean? Did I go too woke on that one, or what? Was it too woke for you?
Well, no, not woke to me. It's a good point. I think there's many ways to dissect it. I'm just not really too sure where to start.
Let's just keep it simple and let's look at it from this perspective, I guess. You have Trump, or you have Biden, and they of course come from elite families or elite backgrounds. Their families are politically connected. They have wealth. They come from these noble families in the Northeast.
Biden is one of those oligarchs. Trump, arguably made himself, but he's been entrenched in that oligarch social elite throughout his life. Yeah.
So how can these people relate to the average immigrant worker who's predominantly going to be either Latin American or Mexican or South American worker at age 40, a female that's in the workplace that, during their time at 40 years old, how old were they 50, 40 years ago? What year was that? It was the 70s, right?
40 years ago, Trump, 40 years, 80s. Yeah.
So in the 80s, what were most of the
Yeah.
It's totally
it's different. Just like, and not just like, when you're 60, you have a different experience to when you're 20. When you're up here, it's the world itself has changed. As you say, not just economically developed, but culturally, civilizationally developed into this multicultural, advanced democracy, corporatism. It's not, the world that you grew up in is no longer exists. The past is a foreign country.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a totally totally different. It's a totally different culture, totally different. It's a totally different workplace and totally different lifestyle than it was. The reason why people went to work in the 70s, excuse me, in the 80s, and they were married, they had kids, and they had to work in order to pay for their children to live that, to survive. They had to take care of a wife at home, and they had to take care of children. Most of the workers, and they had access to pensions. They had access to they had more workers' rights. They had better work schedules. Everything was different. This modern society that we live in the West, and which I'm speaking as a millennial, we don't have access to education like they did. The education, you can work a summer job and pay for your entire year of education. You have to take loans now if your parents don't provide, or you don't get an economic scholarship if you go to college. You can't find a lot of work, like a lot of high-paying jobs, without a degree. So you have to invest in your education. There's no guarantee that you're going to find a job even after you graduate. Even if you go into STEM and these high level degree fields, like engineering, science, mathematics.
My friend went into electric and electronic engineering. He graduated number one in his university, top, the equivalent of an Ivy League in the UK is called Russell Group. And he finished. He got a job, but he's like, I asked him about his job. He's in consulting because there's no actual industry that's going on in the UK. It's only consulting for kind of government primarily, some civil projects as well. But that's all you can get. And because you're like, this level on a consulting gig and you're not being hired by someone that's actually doing something, the salary, it's like half what I expected he should be on after doing a master's degree, graduating number one. I'm like, how much are you earning? I thought he'd be on double that because I was anticipating to be earning about that when I have graduated with my economics degree. But just it's crazy because the state of the world that's in is awful. One of my favorite like little side quests to do is if you look at historical pictures of the United States, for example, or the city that you live in, and you look 100 years ago, you look at the household, and it's a dad with a car and a wife and children, all supported on a single income, reasonable living standard, etc. And you look at what's happening today, and as you say, you can't afford things.
What do you think about the difference between the ability? Let's say if you look at Russia, look at their ability to withstand the rest of the West, with their industrial output, and then you look at China, look at their industrial output and what they're doing and how many engineers they're graduating. Look at how many engineers Russia's graduating. Like, what do you think about their government is actually it's clearly functional. It's clearly a functional government. I think the Western governments have been parasitized. We can't, we don't have to totally reject. Right? Yeah, there are problems, but generally if you just look at the KPIs, they seem to be doing pretty well.
So Russia has industrial output and natural resource wealth. The United States has natural resource wealth, but they've offshored all their industrial output and they're reliant on services. And as we've seen, there's massive problems there, especially when the political class gets involved. For example, America under Trump was energy independent. And then Biden comes in, he destroys the pipelines, he uses up all the strategic oil reserve that Trump built up during that crisis with COVID. And Russia have industrial output, China have industrial output, and also they have, for example, China with their Douyin, their TikTok, they are promoting engineering, they are promoting good behavior, good conduct. Again, highly flawed. I don't like the Chinese regime. I don't love the Russian regime. But you compare it to the Western governments, and you should say, look at the KPIs. Why is Russia able to withstand the West? Because we've sanctioned car sales. Okay, well, we've got to build some cars. We're going to have problems in the first year, but they've now got a decent car industry. They don't need the West because they have the resources. They can manufacture the goods and services. They can anyone can do services.
Yeah, I mean that's the name of the game, man. It's just I mean the thing is like as far as engineers, as far as internationally, I believe Mexico graduated more engineers than the United States did last year. So that's where all the jobs are going. Currently in the United States, a lot of the manufacturing and engineering jobs are going to Mexico because of that. And they're doubling down on their investment in that education. And you start seeing, like, for instance, the United States and Canada, for that matter, they started cutting a lot of petroleum engineering jobs or petroleum engineering schools and seats and college or education. And as a result, there's now a deficit for petroleum engineers. I mean, they're now looking for petroleum engineers fresh out of college without any experience. I mean, literally, if you graduate with a petroleum engineering degree, you can just go right in the field. They're that desperate need for them, especially with the sudden increase in the demand for oil, from what I understand, being in the industry. Just go to like rigjobs.com or oil jobs, and you'll see like list of like demand for petroleum engineers, no experience necessary. You know what I mean? Just a college degree in it. And they make good money. They make six-figure income. It's just you have to go to remote areas. You have to go to places that you can't bring a family a lot of times, and it's difficult. It's good for someone who's single. I mean, if you want to go into a job field or you want to go to an education that's going to be guaranteed a job, look into petroleum engineering, because like I said, you have a high likelihood chance of getting the job afterwards. The problem is if you can find a seat in a university or technical school to get that degree. That's the reality.
There's also like there's a lot of places that you don't need a degree for. A lot of jobs don't need a degree for. I know it's there's been inflation in qualifications that mean maybe you do need degrees nowadays. I don't know. I don't have a degree. I left university after being number one in my university, the biggest university in the UK, for economics, because I didn't need it. I enjoyed it. I didn't need it, and I had other things that I had to do instead. Again, like, what's more important, living in cities and this dystopian grind that people are living through, or living a better life, enjoying yourself more, maybe being a bit more remote, but I personally value nature, without pesticides, without poisons, without government, much more than I would ever have expected growing up. And it's certainly enriched my life far beyond these synthetic considerations.
Yeah, and it's interesting.
With that, I have to get off. I think in conclusion, we live in a synthetic, in a constructed reality by the political elite. We have illusions of choice. We have delusions. We have data cattle. We have the boomers who are hostile when you point out what's going on. We have tyrannies of government, tyrannies of the majority, manipulation, propaganda, and this centralization of power results in a dependency culture, resulting in inefficiencies economically, resulting in decline of civilization economically, politically, socially, financially as well. All of these are leading to collapse, leading to crises, leading to problems. And it's my belief that it all largely stems from government. Again, there's societal factors as well. I think that, you know, the culture has a lot of problems there, but again, how much of that is upstream from the state or downstream from the state? But you need to empower yourself, and you know, not just in terms of strength, but in terms of, you know, consciousness. Empower yourself to reject this paradigm and become more independent, and at least start on this journey to breaking this cycle of Western decline and collapse.
Yeah, well put. I mean, I can't add anything else to that. You pretty much summed up everything. That's well put. Yeah, I appreciate you coming on. Like I said, I hope to see you more often on the podcast. Thanks, Jem, for joining us. And I guess that'll conclude the 12th edition of the Cyber Cafe. Thanks, guys, for coming to join us today. And like and subscribe. Go ahead and I put a link in the description for Adam's other, Twitter and YouTube channel and everything. You can go in the link tree there and visit him and follow him there on his social media. And like I said, if you guys want to sponsor a podcast or if you wanted to buy me a coffee, links in the description. And other than that, I'll see you guys on the next edition. Have a nice day.